I made perfect maps for each monkey, and we're going to see how far each tier 5 can get on their own. We'll start with dart monkeys. The Ultra Juggernaut is a fun one because we get to put it in a circle surrounded by hedges. This lets it always be attacking, and its balls will bounce off the walls, re-hitting the balloons. This lets it do way more damage than normal and easily beat rounds 95 through 100. One thing to note is that we will be giving every tower a MIB to make sure they can damage every balloon type, but other than that, they're on their own. But this let the Ultra Juggernaut beat all sorts of rounds. The 3 bads that come on round 119, the super dense ZOMGs and BFBs of round 137, and the 126 DDTs of round 138. But what finally took it down was the fortified bad on 140. It just had too much health to take out by the exit. Onto the Plasma Monkey Fan Club. This guy just needs a really long map, so his ability has time to come off cooldown. So we made him a straight line from corner to corner that the balloons run back and forth on, and gave him a tech bot to always use his ability. This worked great until round 72, where his base mode made a Regrow Farm too big for his Plasma version to take out. So this is his limit. But his true power comes in his ability to transform other monkeys, so we backed him up with 19 other dart monkeys and gave them MIBs as well. This does go against part of the video, so his official score is 72, but I want to see how far these could go. They crushed all the way through the early hundreds, taking out huge hordes of balloons no problem. And the cooldown is short enough to not really have to worry about it. But all good things have to come to an end, and for the PMFC, it was round 138. They just couldn't pop all the DDTs before they raced to the exit. Next is the Crossbow Master. I tried on a very long and straight map to give him plenty of time to take out all the balloons in case he was pierce capped. This worked great until round 76, where the extra track gave the balloons time to regrow and overpower the dart monkey. So we switched this up and made a shorter map where he can almost always attack. This did much better as he blew through round 76 no problem and was even able to beat the bad on round 100. But where he really struggles is against a map full of balloons where they cap out his pierce. And that's exactly what round 103 did, which is the round that bested him. Onto the Glaive Lord. I was debating between this map and one that's a skinny oval, but I think they'd be about the same. At the start, he was one-shotting everything and we were hauling through the rounds. He's a pretty balanced tower with his tons of pierce, decent damage, and the shred damage over time effect for the first balloon he hits. This let him get to the hundreds pretty easily and even take down the 3 bads on round 119. But this was the first time that he struggled, showing that bads are his weakness. He continued on for the next 20 rounds, popping everything without fear of losing, but it was the fortified bad on 140 that finally took him down. The Glaive Lord was able to pop the outer layer in time, but the DDTs inside were able to leak. Next, we have the Perma Charge. I wasn't sure what crosspath to make him, as the 250 has more pierce, but the 052 has more damage. I guessed the extra damage would be helpful against round 119, so I went with that option. This crushed the rounds, including the 3 bads that I was worried about, but was taken out shortly after by the obnoxious number of fortified BFBs that come on round 124. It was clear that he got pierce capped long enough for the balloons to leak, so I bought a continue and tried it again with a 250 for that extra pierce, and it did much better. Not only beating the round, but it seemed like he did it with plenty of time left. And the best part was that it wasn't round 140 that took us out. Nope, it was 138 with all those DDTs. Even here, he maxed out his pierce, so we don't have to worry about the other crosspath doing better. But round 138 is his score. Shifting gears, we have the Moab Domination. I put him at the very end of a long straightaway and watched him smoke everything that got in his range. Even rounds like 137 and 138 weren't a match for him. But he didn't use this long straightaway as well as I thought he would. Sure, his rangs would hit a bunch of things on the track, but he could really only reach about a fourth of it, and this caused him to leak some ceramics inside the fortified bad of 140. But I had a bad feeling about this placement, so I moved him to the center and tried again. And boy did this do better. Not only did he beat this round, but he went back to crushing the rounds after. Sure, the bads would take him a bit to pop, but everything else was a piece of cake. That is, until he faced round 163 and its insane number of ceramics and leads. There were so many on screen that I had no idea how far they were, and my computer even lagged a bit. But eventually, some made it to the finish line and ended our run. Next up, we have the Bloon Crush. This guy would either one-shot the balloons or stall them until they were no more. It was pretty satisfying to watch, but I was happy I had the faster forward mod on, so this didn't take hours. Just 20 minutes. But at some point, the unstunnable balloons had to start coming. Round 100 got surprisingly far, but this guy's 24 damage was enough to eventually take out the outer layer, and he popped the insides no problem. He went back to popping ZOMGs and below easily, but the bads will be back. and on 119, the 3 of them were too tanky and fast to take out before leaking. Onto the Moab Eliminator. I placed him down on around 41 like most other towers in this video, and he was instantly struggling. It's no secret that he specializes in Moab damage, but I was not expecting this. Anyway, he managed to pop all the balloons several laps into the map and took on the regrows of 42. I didn't think anything of it, but before long he'd taken out all the normal balloons and left us with a massive regrow farm too big to take out. I even gave him a second try, but the regrows were too much for him. So we have a new lowest round of only 42. What isn't weak to normal balloons though is the bomb blitz. This hauled through the rounds, making light work of even the early hundreds. I mean, these massive rushes of BFBs, ZMGs, and even DDTs were a non-issue, but we all know it doesn't have the most single target damage, so it probably lost to round 119, right? Wrong. They lived a while, but he managed to beat the round and move on. I thought this meant he'd go all the way to the fortified bad on 140, but it was actually the 18 fortified ZOMGs on round 131 that beat him. While he does have a ton of pierce and can even pop bads, he could not get through these tanky layers in time. Moving on, we have the Inferno Ring, the top path tac shooter. I made sure to put this guy inside a loop and put him on a very long map to get the most out of his main attacks and global meteor. His fire melted any balloon that came in his range, and the meteor was popping blimps in just a few seconds. I mean, he even popped the fortified bad on round 140. Sure, it took him a while to break it down and beat the round, but that thing has so much health. And after he popped that, I wasn't sure what would beat him. Now, bads come just about every round after 140, and they'd be the last thing standing every time, but he just kept popping them. And in the end, they weren't even what took him down. Nope, it was a screen full of ZOMGs and DDTs. The green turtles ate up all the meteor's pierce, while the little spiders whizzed through the map at the speed of light, leaking on round 151. Next, we have the Super Maelstrom. I put him in the same spot as the Inferno Ring, as it'll give him plenty of time to get his ability off cooldown with each use. As expected, his main attack didn't do much, even against the easy balloons in the 40s, but the second he popped his ability, the screen would be cleansed. I personally loved rounds 64 and 65, as the timings on his abilities were perfect. What was nice was that he seemed to do well against all types of balloons. Huge rushes were countered by his insane pierce, and the tanky ones like ZOMGs and bads were slow enough to take several point-blank abilities. But health scales with every round, and eventually these things would be too healthy to pop in time. And for the Smail, it was the fortified ZOMGs of 135. I was impressed as he popped all the fortified DDTs at the start of the round, which was my guess for what would eventually leak. Onto the Tac Zone, a fan favorite tower. I put him in the same spot as the other Tac Shooters and watched him pop everything at the very start of the track. The only balloons that might get by were those inside of Moabs, and they were quickly picked up on their way back to the start. I was so confident in this guy as I've used him in so many Black Border and boss event runs, and here he was even popping BFBs in one lap. But it was weird seeing him without a primary training or alchemist next to him, and this missing pierce and damage caught up to him quick. On round 76, he made a regrow farm big enough to take out a city. Now, I gave him the benefit of the doubt and tried again on a straight line map so the balloons didn't have as much time to regenerate, but he did it again here. He had the attack speed and projectiles, he just needed more damage and or pierce to beat the round. Now, I need to cool off after that disappointing performance, so we're going over to Ice Monkeys. I put the Super Brittle where the Inferno Ring was and watched him wreak havoc. His ice shards were tearing the balloons apart, and the ceramics were getting frozen until they popped. His obvious weakness, though, was Moabs. Even on round 50, they made it several laps around before popping. This only happened if there weren't other balloons around, though, because sometimes we'd pop blimps right away with the ice shards from other balloons being popped. So we just had to hope it'd line up like this. It was funny to watch because sometimes we'd insta-pop BFBs, and other times I'd do several laps around the track, like on round 75. I assumed this meant he'd lose to round 80, but somehow he managed to pop the ZOMG and all the insides before they leaked. It had to be close with how long it took, but impressive nonetheless. He continued to slowly move through the rounds, whittling down Moab class balloons until he got down to just ceramics, and he'd use those to end the round quickly. But it was round 85 that took him down. These slightly faster and healthier ZMGs were too much, as some ceramics got through. Next, we have the Arctic Wind. This guy would slow balloons down to a crawl and pop them ever so slowly, with his ability being popped constantly by a tech bot. It was kind of painful to watch, even in super fast forward mode. What was even worse though, was watching Moabs do lap after lap, only taking a couple damage with each ability and attack. But this slow, combined with a tiny amount of damage, was enough to whittle them down. Did it take several minutes per round? Yes, but it was working, so I couldn't complain. What I did like was when a couple mobs would pop and all their ceramics would get stuck in his Arctic aura, like at the end of round 58. That was satisfying. But eventually we faced a blimp that was too tough for us to handle, and for him it was the BFB. This red lobster ever so slowly made its way through the map. We only popped his outer layer 1.5 laps away from the exit, which is nowhere near long enough for our Arctic wind to pop the Moabs inside. On to the most fun ice monkey, we have the Icicle Impale. This one we put in the middle of a straight line map to max out its pierce and let it attack as often as possible. Unlike the others, it popped the balloons and blimps no problem, and was still satisfying to watch, especially round 63. But I figured it would start struggling once it got pierce capped in the 90s, but that didn't seem to be the case. It took out Moab layers quickly and then just froze the ceramics until they were all gone. I mean, even round 98 wasn't that scary. It took out several BFBs with each pass, and the balloons inside weren't a problem, making for a pretty easy round. I mean, it even did enough damage to the bad to pop the outer layer in just 5 laps, which is only about a fifth of the way through the map. I honestly had no idea how far this guy would go, but that old pierce cap thing finally caught up to him on round 104. While not hard to take out individually, 175 Moabs and 39 BFBs proved to be too much for him. On to everyone's favorite monkey, the Bloon Solver. I put him at the very end of the long straightaway, as this will give the corrosive glue plenty of time to damage balloons while they're out of his range. It'll let him use more of his pierce on average, and the balloons will always be running over the puddles popped ones leave on the track. As expected, he started melting his way through the rounds. BFBs and under would be popped in a couple seconds, and once the puddles got on the track, it was over. I especially liked rounds 75 and 76 because we got to see him shred dense packs of ceramics as if there was nothing there. He didn't slow down until ZOMG started coming in the 80s, but it didn't take too long to get through this outer layer. And if he damaged these green turtles with acid puddles, it went even faster, like on round 94 where we got through all but one of the ZOMGs on their first pass. ZOMGs aren't the toughest balloons though, so let's fast forward to the bad. Here, on round 100, it took 13 laps around the map before he got through the outer layer, which is over halfway through the map. What's nice is that he popped the DDTs inside pretty quick, and the ZOMGs were handled like usual. Throughout the early hundreds, the hardest thing to deal with were the fortified ZOMGs, as they're pretty tanky, but once he took one down, the rest would fall shortly after like a line of dominoes. He countered dense waves like 104 and 105 no problem, and even took on the fast DDTs without issue. But eventually, he had to face more bads, and the 3 that come on run 119 were too much. He actually managed to pop some of the outer layers, but the DDTs inside the second one made it to the exit. Next, we have the Glue Storm, a support monkey. I made him a 250 so his glue would do some damage, and we used a tech bot to spam his ability. To start, his main attack would get him through the rounds, but this actually sped up quite a bit when he'd rain glue on everything. I guess that extra damage really helps when you're only dealing 1 damage every couple seconds. I was a bit worried about Moabs once getting to the 50s, but he actually did a good job at taking them out. I mean, he even beat round 60's BFB without leaking, though it did take a very long time. What's funny is he could handle ceramic rushes of any size without issue, as his glue storm would affect them all, but the second a fortified Moab or BFB was brought into the mix, it took him forever to beat the round. It makes sense, but it was pretty dramatic of him, like on round 78 where the BFB lived much longer than anything else, even though it spawns in the middle of the round. But it was the ZOMG that eventually beat him. He did manage to get through the ZOMG and BFB layers, but the Moabs ended up leaking. There was just no way his low-level corrosive glue could do enough damage in time. Moving on, we have the Super Glue. The nice thing about him is that his base attack deals damage to Moab class balloons, and everything that he glues takes 20 damage every 2 seconds, meaning we can crosspath him as a 025 to give him more pierce for the balloon heavy rounds later on. I put him on the straight line to make sure he could always make use of his glue splatters, and he started chugging through the rounds. Any balloon he glued was brought to a halt and would disappear shortly after. Even Moabs were popped pretty quick. This continued to be the case even on rounds 79 and 80, as he popped the huge number of regrow rainbows no problem, and he dealt with the tanky blimp layers as if they were nothing. I mean, he even popped almost the entire ZOMG on the first pass. His limited pierce did start to show itself in the 90s, but his constant stuns and corrosive glue were enough to get him through the rounds. Honestly, the scariest round was 95, as the DDTs were hauling when he couldn't splatter them all, but once he cleared most of the map, he caught up and emptied the screen. He managed to make his way through the 90s, but then he had to face the bad. The balloon he can't slow or stun, and all he can do is shoot it as it floats by and hope he does enough damage. And did he ever? He popped the outer layer after about 9 laps around the track and the inside shortly after. Pretty impressive, but early into the hundreds he was pierce capped again, and on round 103 there were just too many balloons for him. Eventually some ceramics got through, ending the run. Shifting gears, we have the Cripple Moab, our first military monkey. I made this guy a 520 as I figured his shrapnel would help a ton once there are a bunch of Bloons on screen. And I put him at the end of the straight map so his shrapnel would have the highest chance of hitting other Bloons. At the start, he was one-shotting everything, even fortified ceramics, and once Moab started coming, it only took a couple shots to take them out too. This continued for quite some time, but started to get fun in the 90s. Here, there'd be enough blimps on screen that you just randomly see some getting stunned by the shrapnel, and I left the sniper on first to make sure he'd take out any children's ceramics that were surely leading the charge. But the first scary round was 95, as there were so many purple and lead Bloons eating up his Pierce, and I couldn't tell how far along the track everything was, especially once the DDTs and Moabs got involved. Honestly, I have no idea how he managed to whittle down this round, but I'm happy he made it through. Round 100 was much easier than any of the other 90s, as he got to make better use of his single target damage. I mean, each shot does 280 damage, so it's no surprise he popped this outer layer in just over a lap. And there weren't enough children Bloons to overwhelm him, so the DDTs and ZOMGs inside were not an issue. What was too much for him though was round 104, as the screen was full of purples, leads, ceramics, Moabs, and BFBs. Way too much for his bullets and shrapnel to get through, so this was his limit. Next, we have the Elite Sniper. We made him a 250 for that extra damage and put him on the straight map to get the most out of his shrapnel. For the first several rounds, he kept the Bloons at the entrance, but that changed once Moab started coming. They'd survive about half a lap on the round, and the Bloons behind them would be safe until they got within bouncing range. In fact, he did much better versus Moabs when other blimps or Bloons were around, because he'd get way more shrapnel to damage them. This was great, and even rounds like 63 and 64 went off without a hitch. I did not expect this to keep working in the 90s though, when the RBE shoots through the roof, but he even managed to take out round 98. The BFBs started to get popped on the first lap, and their outer layers were fully taken out by the end of lap 4. The ZOMGs took a little bit longer to pop, but he still managed to beat the round without any real fears of leaking. What was scary though was round 100. The Bad did almost 20 laps before breaking down into ZOMGs and DDTs. Luckily, the insides were dealt with much faster than the outer layer, but boy, those ceramics had to be within a lap or two of leaking. But just like the Cripple Moab, round 104 overwhelmed our boy. This round has claimed so many monkeys already, and I think it's going to continue. But now we're on to the Elite Defender. We made this guy a 025 for that beautiful shrapnel and put him at the end of the straightaway, just like the Cripple Moab. This tore through the rounds incredibly fast, with nothing getting too far until round 63. Here, the ceramics and leads made it a few laps in before getting popped, but our sniper quickly caught up. One thing to remember about this guy is that he gets more attack speed the farther the Bloons get along the track, so things could look grim and he might pull off a miracle. But then round 76 came and he made a massive Regrow Farm. It didn't matter if I put him on first or last, his shrapnel kept multiplying the Bloons beyond our control. So we had to sell him and make a 205 Elite Defender to beat the round. This worked very well, popping the round in just over 6 laps. But now, we have to continue on without shrapnel, meaning waves with tons of Bloons will be tough for us. This really showed itself in the 90s as we popped each ZOMG, BFB, Moab, and ceramic one at a time, while the others marched closer and closer to the exit. It wasn't painful to watch, but it felt like our sniper was going through a checklist, checking off each round one blimp or Bloon at a time. Round 95 was scary for this guy as well, as the whole map was full of Moabs at the end, and I had no idea how far along the track they were. But slowly, he brought them all down. What was nice was how fast he dealt with the Bad. This extra damage let him pop the outer layer just over 1 lap into the track, giving him more than enough time to pop the ZOMGs and DDTs inside. Just like the other snipers though, the early hundreds were brutal. He managed to get through the hundreds of Bloons on 101, the 30 DDTs and miscellaneous blimps of 102, but the 150 Moabs and 10 fortified ZOMGs of round 103 were too much. So he lost 1 round before the other 2 tier 5 snipers. Moving on, we have submarines, starting with the Energizer. I put this guy in the middle of a long oval-shaped map and instinctively made him a 520. This might be the wrong crosspath, but the extra damage to DDTs could be nice. Anyway, he started off popping the Bloons insanely fast, but blimps were a different story. Even Moabs would make it a lap around the map, which does not bode well for the future. Luckily, BFBs were slow enough that they would only make it about a lap in before getting broken down to Moabs, so it wasn't like they were already getting super far into the map. The fortified versions were a bit harder though, as those braced lobsters actually made it pretty far. Luckily, we could still pop the fortified ceramics inside in a single pass, but the ZOMG on round 80 is where I started getting nervous. This guy did 4.5 laps before breaking down to BFBs, and the insides got a bit farther, meaning the Bloons are already getting about halfway through the map. The nice thing though is that Pierce won't be an issue with this guy, as his radioactive attack can hit 1,000 Bloons at a time. So even though we're facing more and more Bloons, that wasn't the reason they were getting farther and farther. No, it's because they get slightly more health and speed with each round. This showed itself on 96 as the ZOMGs almost completed their 8th lap before breaking down to BFBs, and their insides lasted longer than round 80s as well. But what finally did this guy in were the fortified ZOMGs on 97. They were just too tanky to pop in time, and the Moabs inside made it to the exit. But because we have a MIB and the Energizer is in charge of the damage, the other crosspaths should do better. So we tried again with a 502, and he actually managed to beat the round. It still took forever, but he moved on. And we can tell that the extra lead damage didn't make the difference versus DDTs, because he was able to pop all the fortified ones on round 99 as well, but it was the bad on round 100 that leaked. And honestly, it wasn't even close. Onto the preemptive strike. We put him in the same spot as the Energizer and made him a 052, as there weren't any other monkeys that he could take advantage of with advanced intel. So Airburst Darts was the obvious choice. He plowed through the rounds, popping the Bloons on their first pass, and Moabs would be taken down to ceramics with a preemptive missile. Things didn't really get past the sub until the late 70s, where fortified BFBs could tank this missile when entering the map. But even then, they were popped before finishing a single lap around the track. And the ZOMG on round 80 was popped this fast too. But then round 81 came and Super Ceramic started appearing. We could instantly tell the difference because he wasn't one-shotting them like he was a round ago. If you didn't know, all ceramics are replaced with Super Ceramics on rounds 81 and up. This means their outer shells have 60 health instead of 10, but they only spawn one line of children. This makes them harder to take out, but reduces lag in free play, which is part of the reason why towers start to struggle after beating round 80. Anyway, ceramics now take a little longer to take out, but that didn't mean much to the sub, especially when we started using his ability in the late 80s. And with this, he even made hard rounds like 98 look easy. He took down the blimps pretty quick, but it was easy to see that Pierce was his problem, not damage. This did mean he was able to beat the 3 bads on 119 pretty easily. His ability let him chunk through the outer layers quickly, giving him time to clean up the insides. But his Pierce problems eventually caught up to him on round 128, as the BFBs ate up a ton of his Pierce, not letting him pop all the fortified DDTs in time. Next, we have the Submarine Commander. He was popping Bloons and blimps alike super fast, as nothing made it past him until round 63, where each wave of ceramics made it to the back half of the track. I mean, even the fortified Moabs on 64 were getting deleted once they were in his range. This slowed down in the 80s and 90s though, as Super Ceramics took several attacks to break down and there were enough blimps to cap out his Pierce. He was still making good progress though, as even round 95 didn't get too far into the track. And he made the bad look pretty easy, popping the outer layer just a couple laps in, and he took out the DDTs shortly after. The other children lasted a lap or two more, but there was absolutely nothing to worry about. But the few rounds after that were rough to say the least. He somehow got past the fortified ZOMGs on 103, but round 104 was too much, just like several monkeys before him. Moving on, we have the Carrier Flagship. We ran back the same map, as this gives the planes so much time to shoot and lets both sides of the buck fire once the Bloons start getting far. But this was one of the most dominant performances we've seen in a while. No Bloon really got out of the entrance until the 80s, and even here he was popping them in under a lap. I mean, he even took out round 104 pretty quick. Normally, the Moabs on this round fill the entire track until something leaks, but this guy took them all out in a few laps, leaving only the BFBs for him to work on. So he was able to handle crazy numbers in terms of Bloons, but his damage was solid too. He popped all the fortified DDTs and ZOMGs on round 118 without any real fears of leaking, and the bads on 119 weren't too tough either. The first bad was popped just a few laps in, and the final one was popped about halfway through the track. He even started taking on rounds that were in the millions of RBE, like round 137 that has 18 ZOMGs, 24 BFBs, and 48 Moabs. Talk about a lot of Bloons to pop. But eventually this guy had to lose, and it was to round 138. The 81 fortified DDTs and 45 normal ones were finally enough to get through. I honestly couldn't tell how many he popped, but the map was starting to thin out, so he got pretty close to getting them all. Next, we have the Pirate Lord. His main attack popped all the Bloons when they got in his range, and his ability one-shot any blimps he could get his hooks on. This made the early game go pretty quick, and was funny to watch rounds like 86 where he'd pull in every blimp of the round. But even on rounds where there were more blimps than hooks, it drastically lowered the RBE of the round, making it much easier for his cannons to take out the rest. Like on round 98, where he pulled in 2 ZOMGs or 6 BFBs with every ability. As for the bad on round 100, it took 2.5 laps to pop the outer layer, and his hooks did the rest. But this was kind of the theme for the hundreds. He would be doing tons of damage with his main attack, especially since the map was full of blimps, so all of his cannons would be making contact, and his ability would activate several times per round. This worked on basically every combo of balloons. Fortified ZOMGs weren't an issue, as hooks didn't care about how tanky they were. DDTs weren't difficult because he could hook in 6 of them per use, and BFBs and blow were handled by his main attacks. But eventually, he had to take on a blimp too big for hooks and cannons. And for the Pirate Lord, it was the Fortified Bad on round 140. He just couldn't break that outer layer by the time it reached the end of the map. Onto the best Buccaneer upgrade, the Trade Empire. We had to make him a 025 for some extra damage, as he's usually used to make money, not pop balloons. Even with this not being his forte, he was still doing alright. He'd pop most balloons on their first pass, and Moabs in about a lap. This changed once BFBs or large ceramic rushes started coming through though, as he doesn't have the most pierce or damage, making these rounds pretty tough. Still, he had plenty of track to work with, and nothing was getting that far. I was getting worried about the ZOMGs and super ceramics that come in the 80s and 90s, but before we could get there, round 79 happened. At the time, I wasn't even thinking about a Regrow Farm because he took out 76 so easily, but because there were so many rainbows on top of each other, he just didn't have the pierce to finish off each individual balloon, causing them to multiply and overwhelm him. So 79 is where his run ends. Moving on, we have the Sky Shredder. I put him on the long oval map, set him to Wing Monkey, and hit play. He was destroying the rounds, which makes sense as he's a chimp's carry, but he even made the likes of 98 and 99 look easy, and he didn't stop there. The early hundreds that have given so many of our towers trouble were no problem for him. Sure, when he'd pass over a huge horde of blimps, we'd see that he was getting pierce capped, but the damage output was crazy and he was clearing these rounds pretty quick. I suppose firing 32 darts and a couple missiles constantly really takes a toll on the balloons. It wasn't just huge numbers that he was good against though, as he took out the 3 bads on round 119 only a quarter of the way through the map. As for DDTs, he was able to pop the 99 that come on round 126. Now, I couldn't tell exactly how far they got, but by the looks of it, they got about halfway to the exit. And this makes sense, as it was the fortified DDTs that ended up leaking on round 138. They finally had the health, numbers, and speed to get by our monkey ace. Next, we have the Zar Bomba. I put him on the straight line map to get more out of his bombs that only drop on the track. This way, they should hit more balloons with each explosion. We also set up a tech bot to be dropping his nuke whenever it's ready, and this came in handy a lot sooner than I thought it would. Like on rounds 78 and 79, where the balloons would start to get far until he dropped his bomb. Now, I'm sure he would have been able to pop them all, but it was nice resetting the screen with each ability. This explosion affects up to 5,000 balloons, so we should never really have to worry about its pierce being capped, as having that many balloons on screen would be a bit absurd. I mean, even in the early hundreds, where other towers have been put to the test, every balloon was being affected by the bomb, letting us cruise through these rounds. This was especially nice on ones with DDTs, as they'd be hauling through the map like usual just to get deleted by this ability. So it's clear that this guy's weakness is a strong single target, and on round 140, the fortified bad took us out. He actually got really close to popping it, as it was covered in bandages, but he still would have had to get through the DDTs and ZOMGs inside. Onto the Flying Fortress, one of the most expensive upgrades in the game. This guy has an absurd amount of damage, so we're jumping straight to round 140, where he managed to pop the fortified bad in just over 3 laps around the map, and the insides were cleaned up no problem. So he still had 75% of the track left to work with. Over the next several rounds, he fought all sorts of weird combos, popping several bads in a round, fighting bads layered on top of DDTs and CMGs. I mean, he even took on round 163's weird rushes of leads and ceramics. And for that one, he held the entire round to the very start of the track. But as things gained more health and speed, they got farther and farther along the track, to the point where each round took a few minutes to complete. Not the biggest deal in the world, but it was one of the reasons why I installed the faster forward mod for other towers. But in the end, it wasn't even a bad that took him out. It was fortified DDTs layered on top of BFBs and Moabs. This made it difficult for a flying fortress to damage them, as the colored blimps were essentially armor. So round 183 is where he lost. Next, we have the Apache Prime, and we made him a 502 for that extra attack speed. This guy also has quite some popping power, so we'll be jumping straight to round 119. Here, he took on the 3 bads, popping the last of them in just over 4 laps. Now, leaving him on pursuit is very nice as he tracks the frontmost balloon, but it also works very well on this map as he always seems to be shooting right down the straightaway, so he should get the most out of his pierce. This was shown to be the case in the 130s, as there were times where you could see the plasma and or laser attacks hit their pierce cap and stop flying along the track. And because he got to make use of his pierce, he handled ZOMGs and DDTs just fine, bringing him back to the bads on round 140. Here, his damage was truly tested, and he came out on top. Something interesting though, is that he's one of the only towers that popped the fortified bad before the normal one. Usually, the remaining attacks would damage the normal bad enough to pop it first, but because of how his pursuit mode worked out, the normal one actually outlived the fortified one. Anyway, he kept plowing through the rounds after this, taking on bads, DDTs, and all sorts of blimp combinations. But what finally bested him was round 154. Similar to the Flying Fortress, there were just too many layers of balloons. Fortified DDTs on top of BFBs on top of Moabs, and this layered protection was enough to escort a DDT to the exit. Moving on, we have the Special Operations Helipilot, and he got to play on the long Christmas-themed oval map. Why his helipad got placed below the gingerbread cookies, I don't know, but I kinda love it. Anyway, we had a tech bot spamming his Marine, and between these two, they kept popping the balloons at the start of the track for a while. If you didn't know, the Marine is pretty strong with 6 damage and 20 pierce, and he made rounds like 98 and 99 look a bit silly. These stats on the Marine are nice, but what's truly impressive is its attack speed, as he looks like a super monkey with how fast he's shooting. But after they broke the bad, they had to take on the hundreds. The balloons got farther with each round, but the 120s are where things actually took a while to pop. Whether it was fortified ZOMGs, DDTs, or just a ton of blimps in general, it was a bit scary as it was hard to see how far everything was getting, especially once the heli started blowing back ceramics to earlier parts of the track. But what eventually made it to the exit was a DDT on round 138. Another round leader for ending runs, this huge number of DDTs has proven difficult for a single tower to take out. On to the last heli pilot, we have the Comanche Commander, aka the Com. I put him on the straight line map because I figured his pursuit mode would work similar to the Apache Prime and would get a lot out of his pierce. This was the case for the most part, letting him destroy rounds like 95, but because the 3 mini helis are grouped next to him, some of their darts were shot at an angle, so less of them used their full pierce on average. We can't avoid this though, so I moved on. It was fun watching him pursue the balloons, as most other towers in the game are stationary, but an added benefit was his Moab shove. You could tell when the blimp started to thin out because you could see him start to slow the ones in front, and it was nice to know this was always happening, even if there were too many balloons on screen to see it. He made his way through the early hundreds and took down the 3 bads on 119 about a quarter of the way through the map. I guess that's what happens when you have a tower firing 19 darts with every attack. But after these bads, he worked his way through the 120s and 30s, dealing millions of damage just like the towers before him. But like some others, round 138 put a stop to his reign of terror. Once again, the 126 DDTs were too much. Next, we have the biggest one. I made it a 502 for that beautiful burn damage and watched it one-shot any balloon it hit. I mean, even fortified Moabs were getting popped in an attack or two, and the ceramics inside would only take one more hit to wipe out. This was super nice for 63 and 64, but pretty quickly we found ourselves in the 90s. And even here, the biggest one was having a field day. He popped all of round 96 in just one loop around, and the fortified ZOMGs of 97 only made it a lap and a half in. This guy is known for his damage and pierce, but that burn effect we gave him makes him especially lethal, as it burns all balloons for 50 damage every 0.625 seconds, which is super nice, especially against bads. Speaking of which, he popped the outer layer of the 3 bads on 119 in just 4 laps, giving him plenty of time to burn the insides and move on to the 120s. Here, he seemed to counter every round. If they were tanky and slow, like ZOMGs, he had plenty of time to break them down. And if they were weak and fast, like DDTs or Moabs, he'd pop them in just a few attacks. I mean, even the crazy DDT round of 138 was no match for him. It only took a couple seconds and they were all gone. But then the fortified bad came on round 140. He managed to pop the outer layer and the normal bad, but the DDTs inside the fortified one got to the exit. Onto the pop and ah. I set his targeting to the center of the map, where his explosions would hit as many balloons as possible most of the time, and we used a tech bot to use his ability whenever it was up. This stuns balloons and deals 20 damage per second for 8 seconds. The combination of his attack and ability kept the screen pretty clear of balloons until the ZOMGs started coming in the 80s, but even here he cleaned them up pretty quick, especially if they got stunned in range of his attacks. But the balloon he can't stun came on round 100. I wasn't sure how far it'd make it, but his damage added up, popping the outer layer in just 6 slaps, and the insides were easy to deal with. As for the early hundreds, the pop and ah was a solid counter. No bads come, and his ability affects the whole screen, so whether it was DDTs, ZOMGs, or weaker, they were all getting stunned and taking constant damage. Enough to where nothing was really scary. I mean, he even had enough damage to beat round 119, which I thought would take him out for sure. He kept plowing through the rounds, and it looked like he was going to make it all the way to 140, but then tragedy struck. Round 138 came with all its DDTs. They very quickly filled the screen and were flying through the map. The pop and ah got 2 abilities off while they were rushing towards the exit, but the ceramics inside the final fortified DDT got through. Talk about close. Next, we have the Bloon Incineration, and we put him on the same map so that the Bloons would have to pass through his walls of fire over and over again. This made the Bloonsin one of the faster towers we've used so far, as even in the 90s, he was breaking down the blimps and Bloons in the blink of an eye. In just one pass, he'd get almost everything to Moabs or ceramics, and the rest would melt away the next time they made it to the center. This gets made even easier because he would remove the fortified property from BFBs and below, drastically reducing the damage needed to win. He kept on cruising through the rounds, but I wasn't sure how he'd do against bads, and on round 119 he showed that they weren't a problem, popping their outer layers about a quarter of the way through the map, and the insides only made it a couple laps farther. Now, it is a bit unfortunate that he can't strip the fortified property off ZOMGs and DDTs, as these are prevalent in the 120s and 30s, but he was doing just fine. I mean, even the horde of DDTs on 138 popped pretty quick, which I was not expecting. But then it was time for the fortified bad on round 140. The outer layer has 200,000 HP, not to mention the insides, and yet somehow the Bloonsin managed to pop the bad layer on its 18th lap, giving us just enough time to pop the insides. They were very close to leaking, but once he popped the ZMGs and stripped that property, the BFBs and below were wiped out. The next several rounds all played out about the same. The map would be full of some combination of ZMGs, DDTs, and occasionally a bad, but no matter how many there were, he'd slowly melt the Bloons down until there were just bads left, and he'd slowly pop them. And this continued until round 153, where the bad was finally too fast and strong to be popped in time. The sad part was we lost to the ceramics inside the final couple Moabs, so he was very close to making it to the next round. Moving on, we have the Ray of Doom. This was actually the first monkey I recorded, and it was before I spiced up the maps. Obviously, we put him on a long straightaway and had him fire down the entire thing, and he was putting on a show. When I say he kept the balloons off the screen, I mean I literally didn't see a balloon until ZOMG started coming, and even then it was only for a split second. The 90s are where we finally got to see some balloons enter the map, but even then it was short-lived. I never thought I'd root for the balloons. But I was wishing they'd get stronger and faster to make this more of a challenge for him. Fast forward to round 140, where we took on the fortified bad. He popped this entire round in just 5 laps, and it would have been faster if the normal bad didn't tank some of the attacks. If you didn't know, the Ray of Doom does tons of extra damage to the first target it hits, so even though it has 1,000 pierce, you want the tankiest Bloon to be his first target. But we can't really control that this late into free play. Anyway, he continued on, popping everything along the track. Each round he'd pop Moabs and DDTs first, then whittle down ZMGs and BFBs until he was only left with a few bads to deal with. These bads would live on for several laps, being laser shocked the entire time. Once we got to round 176, these whales were living for over 10 laps, and their insides took a few more to take out. So it was no surprise when something finally leaked. I was hoping he'd make it to round 200, but 185 is where he lost. The screen was full of fortified ZMGs and DDTs that were protecting 3 bads from getting hit by the first attack. Once only the bads were left, the rod was able to pop the outer layer of all 3, but the DDTs inside the last one made it out. Onto the Mad, the Moab Destroyer. This guy does insane damage to blimps, but isn't that good against normal balloons. I'm hoping putting him on a long map will help him overcome this weakness. Right off the bat, he was one-shotting the Moabs, but the ceramics inside would make it a lap or 2. Luckily, his ability would help catch him up whenever activated, and the map was long enough for us to not worry about the cooldown. This was a funny change of pace because he would destroy ZMGs and below in the blink of an eye, and then we'd be sitting around waiting for him to finish off the ceramics. It was basically the opposite of every other monkey we've done so far. A good showing of this was round 96, where he popped all the Moabs and BFBs right away, and then there were so many ceramics it actually took a bit for the missiles to be able to reach the ZOMGs, and then he needed 2 rocket storms to pop the super ceramics. But this balloon weakness did catch up to him on round 103. The 150 Moabs and 10 ZOMGs just had too many ceramics inside for him to deal with. He got off 3 rocket storms this round and made a huge dent in the balloons, but some still managed to reach the exit. Next, we have the Bloon Exclusion Zone, aka the Bez. I started him on a shorter straight map so that his projectiles would hit the balloons no matter where they were on the track. This let him fly through the rounds, even beating the likes of 104 with tons of track left to spare. The only issue was we could see him getting pierce capped the entire time. I mean, even on round 106, his shots couldn't hit all the DDTs. So that begs the question, would he do better on a longer map that he can't always attack, but the balloons would be more spread out, or will he do better here? We'll test that in a bit. For now, he continued on, popping the rounds, but they were getting pretty far pretty quick. The only round he didn't struggle with was round 119, where he comfortably popped the bads, but this was due to there only being 3 Bloons on screen for most of the round, and this Pierce issue showed itself on round 124 as the 75 BFBs were way too much for him to handle. He was still working all the Moabs down to ceramics once things started leaking, but what if the map was longer? I moved him over to the middle of the long straight map and let him run free. He made his way to round 124 and popped it no problem. In fact, he continued on through the 120s and 30s with no issues. Whether it was DDTs, ZOMGs, or anything else, he plowed through. He even made it to the fortified bad on 140, where he popped its outer layer in about 5 laps. Pretty impressive for a monkey that lost 16 rounds ago on a shorter map. But eventually he had to lose, and like many monkeys before him, it was on round 151 where the map was full of blimps that were protecting DDTs, and one made it to the exit. But I had a feeling if we ran this back with the Bez on the end of the track, he'd do even better. It doesn't really make sense because he can't see the entire track, but I put him at the end and had him fired on the map just like the Rod and Mad. He made it to round 151 and beat it. Now, we might have just gotten lucky as the rounds are random here, but he continued on for a few more before leaking. On round 156, he ran into the same issue as before, and some DDTs made it to the exit pretty early into the round, but this is his upper limit. Shifting gears, we have our first magic monkey, and what's more magic-y than a wizard? Specifically an Archmage. I put him in the middle of the longest map we have and hit play. His Seeking Bolts came in clutch here as he could shoot on one side of the track and they'd loop back to hit more balloons using more of his Pierce on average. And we could feel his extra blimp damage as he even popped round 104 in a reasonable time. After just a few laps, we could see the Moab start to thin out, and after they were mostly gone, the BFBs started breaking down as well. I mean, even fortified ZMGs didn't last too long versus this guy. He continued on, making it to the 120s and 30s. Things were getting farther and farther each round, but he was still holding strong. Round 137 came with its absurd 1.1 million RBE, and he handled it like a champ. Then round 138 came with all its DDTs, and while it looked incredibly scary with how long they were lasting, he managed to pop them all before leaking. They had to be super close, but he didn't lose a single life. Round 139 was similar in that the map was full of blimps for way too long, but eventually he popped them all. But then it was time for round 140, and the bad was too much. He got through the outer layers and even popped the DDTs inside, but the last of the super ceramics made it through. Next, we have the Wizard Lord Phoenix. I made him a 0.52 for that extra range and pierce. We put him on the straight line map to get the most out of his non-seeking attacks and his wall of fire. He didn't really use these in the beginning though, because the permanent Phoenix kept the balloons at the entrance until BFBs started coming in the 70s. Once our wizard did attack though, the balloons didn't last too long. I didn't even start using his ability until round 111, as this is where the fortified ZMGs worried me just a little bit. But the second we called upon the lava chicken, I knew we were in safe hands. Just a couple of uses and the round was no more. Before using this ability, I was worried about his pierce, but once I saw the meteors cruising through massive hordes of balloons, like on round 137, I knew we'd be fine for a while. Each of the lava chicken's meteors has 300 pierce and deals 50 damage, so it's pretty tough to use all of them up. This was enough to pop the fortified bad and move on to the random rounds. He made it through the 140s where we dealt with the usual layered blimps and 1 to 3 bads each round, but what finally took him down was around 152. He managed to pop all the DDTs and fortified ZMGs, but the final bad lasted just a little too long and its insides got through. Onto one of the coolest looking towers in the game, the Prince of Darkness. We put him in about the same spot as the Wizard Lord Phoenix to get the most out of his wall of fire, and it'll give him the best chance at keeping his graveyard full. He crushed the early rounds while I moved his reanimated balloons around a bit until they stayed in his range as much as possible. If you didn't know, his attacks get bonus damage the more balloons are in his graveyard, so you want this full at all times. This setup let him pop just about everything until ZMG started to come. Their outer layer was tanky enough that he wouldn't get through the green shell until his graveyard was basically empty. Then his weakened version would have to pop them down to nothing to start reanimating balloons. Round 87 was a great example of this, as he did a ton of damage at the start of the round, but slowed down once he was out of balloons. Then he weakly attacked until he was able to pop some super ceramics and refill part of his graveyard. This is always a weakness of his, but a supporting cast of monkeys easily gets around this. Without them though, I knew he'd struggle, and this caught up to him on round 97 as he stopped spawning balloons when the fortified ZMGs had about 50% of their health remaining. This made all of his attacks do very little damage, letting them swim through the map, and eventually some ceramics leaked before he could start spawning balloons again. Next, we have the VTSG. I made this guy a 2-2-2-1 in the middle of the long map and hit play. This is by far the strongest tower we've tested so far, as he was popping the rounds almost as fast as possible. I mean, even the early hundreds barely made it on the screen. Before we knew it, we were at the fortified bed on round 140, and we popped it before the second bed of the round spawned, meaning it didn't even make it a quarter of a lap through the track. In fact, the first Bloon to complete a lap was a DDT on round 192. Yes, it wasn't until 192 that a Bloon made it around this oval. This was quickly one-upped by the second fortified bed on round 200 that made it 2 laps in, but that's not really a fair comparison. Still though, he was making our other towers look like they belong in BTD 2, and he wasn't anywhere near stopping. He chugged along for quite some time, and the Bloons didn't start to get far until the VTSG was in the mid 200s. Here, the fortified ZOMGs and DDTs were popped pretty quick, but the bads, specifically the fortified ones, were living long enough to make it over halfway through the track. This run took hours, even in super fast forward mode, and he kept beating the rounds. I was starting to believe in him making it to round 300, but it all came to an end on round 295. Here, the fortified bads were finally strong enough to leak. Onto the anti-Bloon, the 2-armed menace. We put him in almost the same exact spot as the VTSG and gave him a tech bot just below the Christmas tree, as it looks like a kid's toy. We set his arms to first and strong and watched him rip away. Before I knew it, he was on round 140, where he popped the bads about a quarter of the way through the map. Then he went on to fight the random Bloons of the mid to late hundreds. Between his main attack and his ability though, he should do pretty well. Quickly, he was fighting rounds full of DDTs layered on top of colored blimps, but these speedy spiders were popped with a single ability. It does deal over 10,000 damage and has 2,000 pierce, so that counters the strat that the Bloons have used time and time again to win. And he deals with the tanky bads by focusing them with his main attack and popping his ability every 30 seconds. I assumed a bad would eventually be the thing to take him out, as they just get stronger and faster with each round, but it was actually a DDT on round 174. His ability popped a couple times during this round, taking out most of the threats, but a few DDTs survived by being on the corners of the map each time, and they barely snuck out before his main attack could pop them, and his ability still had a little cooldown left. Next, we have the Legend of the Night. Just like the other super monkeys, he got off to a quick start, popping all of around 139 right as the Moabs got in his range, and followed it up by dealing with the fortified bad in about 4 laps. What's nice is that he attacks whatever is in first, and his batarangs bounce from Bloon to Bloon, getting more out of his pierce. And because he attacks so fast and has pretty high damage, he'd normally be shooting at the bads and pop everything else as they try to pass them. He was hauling through the rounds, and things didn't really get scary until the late hundreds. Here, the Bloons were getting pretty fast, and it'd take him several laps to pop bads and DDTs, but we still had our secret weapon, his black hole. This automatically activates anytime you leak and prevents you from losing any lives for 8 seconds, so we could tank an entire bad if needed. The only thing is that it has a 3-minute cooldown and can only be used twice per round. Still, if something barely manages to get through, we'll be fine as he'll absorb it. This came into play on round 200, where we fought 2 fortified bads. Round and round they went, cruising through the map. They took quite a bit of damage as they were both covered in bandages as they swam into the black hole, but right as I was ready to start round 201, the black hole ended and the second bad leak. I was pretty surprised, but round 200 is a great score. Moving on, we have the Grandmaster Ninja. Because of his seeking attacks, we were able to place him in the same spot as the Legend of the Night. His 9 shurikens with 2 damage each were tearing apart the Bloons. Not even fortified ceramics were making it past him. Now, this is pretty typical for a tier 5 monkey, but I wasn't sure how strong he'd be on his own. Normally, when I get a Grandmaster Ninja or Master Bomber, I buff them with 20 shinobis, but in this video, they're by themselves, and he was doing alright. Moab started coming in the 50s, and he was still managing to pop them on the first pass. In fact, the first Bloons that got past him were the ceramics in the last rush of round 55, but even they were popped before finishing a lap. Things picked up in the 60s as BFBs would always make him past him once, and round 63 got over a lap in. Still, nothing had made it that far until round 76. I tried a few times, but he could never pop the regrow ceramics fast enough. They'd always multiply and regenerate until there were too many to deal with. The Grand Saboteur is up, and he did even worse. We got him on round 41 and hit play. Instantly, the Bloons were rushing through the map as he doesn't have the most popping power, but they were slowed down a bit by his ability. After several laps, he was eventually able to catch up and pop them all, but then round 42 took him out. This round has 6 regrow rainbows, and he was able to turn this into hundreds. It makes sense that he couldn't pop them all in time as he's a support monkey, but this is up there with the Moab Eliminator for the worst run of the day. For the final ninja, we have the Master Bomber, and we'll jump straight to round 76 as the ninja seemed to have a hard time with regrow Bloons. Right away, he made a regrow farm too big to pop, and that was even with the help of Ben's Trojan. I totally forgot to sell him here, but I remembered when we tried again. On the second attempt, I set him to last, and he slowly but surely worked his way through the round. My guess is because he gets a ton of extra damage to stun balloons, and when he would stun the ones in front, he couldn't follow up with shurikens as well because they'd be stacked on top of others. But when he targets the ones in back, they'd be stunned all by themselves. With this, he was able to move on, and we put him back on first. He made his way to the 90s, where his sticky bomb would pop blimps in a reasonable time, and he used his flash bombs and shurikens to clean up the ceramics. What's nice is that he easily had enough damage to pop the bat on round 100, as he broke the outer layer by the time it reached him, only a quarter of a lap in. But eventually he faced a round with too many Bloons to handle, and for our Master Bomber, it was round 104. Shifting gears, we have Alchemists, and we'll start with the Perma Brew. This guy is one of the best support monkeys in the game, so it'll be interesting to see how he does when he has to do the popping. We got him on round 41, and he started chucking those potions. Either on the track or on the Bloons, it didn't matter. These Bloons did several laps, but eventually fell to that damage over time. He wasn't really at risk of leaking, but it was funny how far they got. But just like our Grand Saboteur, the Perma Brew wasn't able to pop the Regrow Rainbows on 42 in time, and they multiplied out of control. Next, we have the Total Transformation. When transformed, he'd pop the Bloons the second they got in his range, but when he was in his base form, he was only slightly better than the Perma Brew. So we played this game of the Bloons getting kinda far, and then he'd clear the screen whenever we used his ability. There were only a few rounds that I was scared of, like 76, but his ability popped the entire round in under one lap. He continued popping the rounds, even the large ceramic rushes of 78, but then the Regrow Rainbows came on round 79. There were too many to take out with one ability, and his base form would multiply them too much between cooldowns. But I figured I'd give this guy the same treatment as the PMFC, as his real power comes from transforming other monkeys. So his score is round 79, but I want to see what he can do if we give him 5 more Alchemists. I know it'd be way better with super buff druids or ninjas, but we have to have some boundaries. The tier 5 Alchemist gets to transform other elks. With these down, we hit play and took on round 79. His ability had a while before we could use it again, and the elks were making a pretty big farm. But once they all transformed, they caught up pretty quick and popped everything. Even the dreaded round 104 wasn't too hard for them. I suppose each mini monster's laser has 10 pierce and deals 2 damage, and when they're not transformed, they get the benefit of the main elk's unstable concoction. So it's no surprise they're doing well. They made it to round 119, where they took on the 3 bads. They popped the first 2 in about 4 laps, but the third made it much farther, with the DDTs inside making it about halfway through the map. This was because it was on the edge of the map outside of the elk's range when they transformed and attacking the other Bloons, so it was still healthy when it was the last Bloon standing, but they still had half the track to deal with. The 120s and 30s were pretty tough on this guy, as it would take more than one transformation to pop the tougher blimps, meaning the Bloons were getting very far each round. And because Unstable Concoction doesn't scale with free play, its bonus damage was becoming less and less relevant, and eventually our Alchemist couldn't keep up. Round 138, with all its DDTs, got through. Even with them having transformed 4 different times this round, they didn't have the damage. Onto the Bloon Master Alchemist, or the BMA for short. I knew he'd struggle as he isn't really a Bloon popper, but more of a free play support monkey. You see, he has a shrinking potion that reduces ZOMGs and below down to red balloons, but he doesn't throw it that often, and outside of this potion, he doesn't deal much damage. So he's used to make free play rounds easier for other monkeys. That being said, it was really fun watching this guy. Some Bloons would be coated with his normal red attack, others would be glowing gold from his potion that makes them worth more when popped. He'd instantly turn leads into money, and of course, it was always nice seeing tough Bloons like ceramics get turned into reds. But even the 40s were getting several laps in, no matter what Bloons were sent his way. This was clearly a problem, and on round 49 it caught up to him. While popping the normal Bloons, his main attack splashed some regrows, causing them to multiply, and by the time his shrinking potion was targeting them, it was too late. So round 49 is his score. Next, we have the Superstorm. Right off the bat, he was throwing super tornadoes and balls of lightning, keeping the Bloons at the entrance. Even rounds like 97 and 98 didn't really make it past him. They'd mosey down the track, only to get blown back to the start once they got in his range. The bad though, that was a different story. You can't slow this guy down or push him back, so we just needed the Superstorm to do enough damage to pop this outer layer. It took a long time, but after about 2/3 of the map, he broke it down and pushed the insides back, eventually popping them down to nothing. Now, it's clear that bads are his weakness, but I wasn't sure how well he'd do against super dense packs of blimps, as they use tons of the Super Tornado's Pierce. but he was managing just fine. While he couldn't keep them all at the start, he was drastically slowing them down as a whole, giving him plenty of time to deal with the rounds. But eventually, he made it to round 119. I was scared as these bads are stronger and faster than the last one he faced, but he actually popped these earlier along the track than the one on round 100. I assume this is because one was always in his range and the others would be hit by the projectiles as they went by, so they took much more damage per lap than when the bad was by itself. But beating these three let him move on to the 120s and 30s, where it was pretty much the same. He'd slow and damage the rounds until he popped enough to keep everything at the start. Then, after a couple minutes of constant attacking, he'd finish off the round. He even managed to beat round 138. It was funny to watch as I had no idea how far each DDT was, and there were so many that his super tornadoes would instantly disappear when he'd throw them. But after about 20 seconds of attacking, he beat this difficult round. What he couldn't beat though was the fortified bad. This thing was too tanky for him to pop, as it still had over half its health by the time it leaked. On to Bloon's favorite, the Spirit of the Forest. We put him in the middle of the straight map to get the most out of his thorns. The closest ones deal 30 damage to ceramics and blimps every half second, the medium thorns deal 15, and the farthest ones deal 10. And they have infinite pierce, so no matter how clogged the map gets with Bloons, we should be fine. At the start of the run, everything was getting popped in a half lap or less, and nothing did a full lap until ZOMGs started spawning. But where things got fun was in the hundreds. Here, the screen would fill with DDTs, BFBs, Moabs, and more, but they'd quickly be wiped out in groups. First, all the DDTs and Moabs would get popped down to nothing, then the BFBs would break apart into Moabs, and finally we'd be left with just ZOMGs, which would do a few laps but then get brought down to BFBs and eventually popped. It was weird but satisfying to see this happen over and over again. I thought we'd lose to either fortified ZOMGs or DDTs in the late 130s, but the Spirit of the Forest made it through to the fortified bad. We watched him go back and forth several times, and when he finally made it to the exit, he only had a few band-aids on him, so he still had over 50% of his health remaining. Next, we have the Avatar of Wrath. In the beginning, he kept the Bloons at the start of the track, but pretty quickly the Bloons were getting past him. They were never close to leaking, but it wasn't the dominant showcase that we were used to. But there are a couple reasons for this. The first is that he doesn't have 5 Poplas to back him up, giving him extra attack speed and pierce. And the other is that he deals more damage the more RBE is on screen, so he should scale a bit once blimps start coming. This seemed to be the case in around 79, as the Regrow Rainbows were able to tank and attack at the start of the round, but once BFB started appearing, he started one-shotting them. And in the 90s, he was able to pop ZOMGs quickly, but once he got down to the final few ceramics of a round, it'd take him a lap or two to take them out. This extra damage let him pop the bad in just one pass and clean up the insides a few laps later, but the early hundreds were too much for him. While there was a ton of RBE on screen, the Bloons managed to get through. That extra damage just wasn't enough to beat round 104. The Lord of the Abyss is next, and I had no idea what to expect. Right out the gate, he was killing it. Nothing was getting past him until the fortified BFBs of round 79, and even those he popped on the second pass. In fact, nothing was getting too far. Round 98 only made it 2 laps around, and the fortified ZOMGs of 107 only lasted 5 laps. And the rounds after that weren't too bad, but the 3 bads on 119 lived way too long. The bad layer themselves made it 12 or 13 laps around before breaking, and the insides completed a few more laps, easily being over the halfway point. It's clear the Lord of the Abyss can handle dense packs of Bloons, but single target damage is where he struggles. I guess this makes sense, as his tentacles do 50 damage each hit and can smack up to 80 Bloons at a time, and his trident doesn't do much in comparison. But this even let him beat round 138. It took a while, but he managed to take them all out, and the Moabs on 139 were a piece of cake. But then the fortified bad came on 140, and the Lord of the Abyss wasn't even close. He only had a couple band-aids on him, so he was only on his second stage of damage. Next, we have Popseidon. We put him in the middle of an enclosed ellipse and hit play. This way, his ability can bounce off the walls, getting the most out of each use, and he still has plenty of track for his main attacks. The funny thing is, I couldn't fit a village next to him, so we had to ultra boost the MIB 10 times for it to be able to reach our Mermonkey. But we got it to work in the end. This guy was flying through the rounds. His main attacks were popping ZOMGs and DDTs in the hundreds very quick, and then his ability would come off cooldown and clear the screen. Before I knew it, he was on round 140. It took him about 5 laps to pop the outer layer of the fortified bad, and only another lap and a half to pop its children. This guy's damage was crazy, but as the rounds went on, he got more and more reliant on his ability. Each ice ball he shoots deals 30 damage, has 240 pierce, and can re-hit Bloons, so when the map is totally closed in like this, the ability does insane damage. But eventually, the Bloons got too tough. I thought it'd be a bad that would eventually take him down, like on round 167, but it was actually DDTs layered on top of BFBs. Popseidon made a huge dent in the wave with an ability, but before it could come back off cooldown, a DDT on round 168 got through. Onto the Final Harmonic. We put him in the middle of a long water map and let him run free. He wasn't doing the most damage, but between the extremely long map and the song that makes it even longer, he had plenty of time to pop everything. Even the ceramics on round 47 didn't last too long. But then round 49 came with its regrow rainbows. Everything was under control until they started multiplying, and the Final Harmonic didn't stand a chance. Moving on, we have support monkeys, starting with Super Mines, one of the most expensive upgrades in the game. And he has so much damage, we'll be starting on round 140. Just one pass through the mines put band-aids on the fortified bad and brought the normal one to below half health. This continued as the second pass brought the fortified one to about 50% and popped the normal bad to just ceramics. And it only took 2 more laps to finish off the round. These super mines kept chugging through the rounds, and pretty soon he was in the 170s where it was getting kind of crazy. He could still pop BFBs and Moabs in about a lap or two, but the screen would fill up with fortified ZMGs and not let him build up a wall of mines. I thought this would make it harder to deal with DDTs, but the explosions were big enough to still pop them all in a couple laps. What this did hurt though was our bad damage. The ZMGs would eat up all the mines, so bads would only get hit by a couple every time they were down bottom. This didn't stop him though, as he was still popping bads about a third of the way through the map, so there was nothing to worry about yet. And honestly, things never really got that scary. Even in the 190s, DDTs were still getting taken out in a few laps. BFBs and below were dealt with quickly, and bads and ZMGs only made it a little farther than before. I mean, we popped the 3 bads on 191 just over halfway through the map. But if normal bads are making it over halfway, you know that round 200 is going to be difficult with its 2 fortified ones. Here, our super mines could focus them way more than usual because there weren't any other Bloons on the track, but even with only having 2 targets, he couldn't pop them in time. The DDTs inside the second bad made it out. Next, we have the carpeted spikes. I put it in the same spot as the super mines so that the Bloons will have to run over his spikes going both ways. Right away, the map was covered in spikes, and our tech bot made the coating even thicker. The only round that made a dent was 63, but the ceramics only made it halfway to our factory. Other than ceramic rushes, we didn't see much until 79, where their constant stream of rainbows actually made a path for the BFBs. It was short-lived, but cool to see. But this let us know that Moabs won't be the problem. It'll be dealing with the ceramics inside. This makes sense as it gets extra damage to blimps, but doesn't have nearly enough pierce to handle dense packs of balloons. Still though, he was able to keep up with rounds like 104 that has taken out several other monkeys. Each spew of spikes took out tons of blimps and whittled down the ceramics inside. I have no idea how far they got, but I bet splitting up the rounds helped a ton. You see, he popped the Moabs and BFBs in waves instead of all at once, which let him handle the ceramics while the blimps were slowly swimming through the map. If he'd broken them all down to ceramics right away, I bet they would have been too fast to deal with. Anyway, he kept doing this, splitting up the rounds and keeping a ton of the ceramics inside slow Bloons like ZOMGs. But eventually, he hit a round that was too much, and for him, it was 124. The BFBs had too many Bloons inside, and unlike ZOMGs, they move at a decent speed and break down to Moabs quickly. So he didn't stall the round well at all. Onto the perma spike. I put him on the longest map and hit play. For the first 40-ish rounds, nothing was getting close to breaking through his wall. Just like in a normal Chimps game, he was able to place more spikes per round than were being used, so we had this nice feeling of safety. That changed in the 80s though, as round 81 got through with its 17 BFBs. He popped almost all of them with his built-up wall, but a little over 3 got through. He had plenty of time to place enough spikes to pop the rest of the round the next lap, but his massive stockpile was gone, and we won't get it back for the rest of the run. From here on out, almost every single round completed at least 1 lap, bringing his spike reserves down to 0. The only round that didn't was 90, which makes sense as it has under 3000 RBE, while every other round in this range has 20k or more. But in the low 90s, the Bloons started completing laps. The ZMGs on round 94 made it around 8 times before the spikes could pop them all, and round 95 made it to the exit. It looked like the Moabs ate all the spikes, letting the DDTs sprint through before the factory could catch up. Moving on, we have the primary expertise. I put him at the end of the long straightaway to get the most out of his ballista. It was one-shotting every Bloon it touched, even fortified ceramics in the 90s. Blimps were slightly different though. It still chunked them down with each hit, but it didn't have the pierce to hurt them all with each attack, and it doesn't fire that fast. This let rounds like 98 get several laps in, but once everything was down to Moabs or ceramics, the pecs caught up quickly. What was nice was that he dealt with the 3 bads on 119 pretty well. He had plenty of pierce to hit all 3, so that 190 damage per attack added up. This let the Pecs pop the outer layers in just 6 slaps, and he had plenty of time to pop the children inside. But the 120s are a different animal. Round 125 came with its 939,000 RBE, and the primary expertise didn't stand a chance. He didn't even manage to break all the ZOMGs down to BFBs by the time something leaked. But that's the only village that does damage, so the other 2 in the Homeland Defense and Monkeyopolis get scores of 0, along with the 3 banana farms. So next is the Sentry Champion. I had to find the balance of getting the most out of his Pierce and the explosions from the sentries timing out, so I put him in the middle of the longest map, and with this, he speed ran to the hundreds. Here, the Bloons were getting several laps in, but all the projectiles and explosions would let him catch up and beat the rounds. Overall, he's very well rounded, as he isn't weak to hordes of Bloons or strong tanky blimps. I mean, he even popped the first bad on round 119 on the 3rd lap and finished off the round a few laps later, which is way better than I was expecting from this guy. And while he didn't do it exceptionally fast, he handled the 75 fortified BFBs of 124 just fine. Nothing was close to leaking, it just wasn't as impressive as when he popped the bads. I will say though, he didn't do the best versus DDTs. Anytime we saw them, they made it pretty far, and this is eventually what took him out on round 138. Right as he was starting to clear out the map, a DDT got through. The Ultra Boost Engineer is next, and we'll be cross-pathing him with sentry guns to increase his DPS. Normally, he's a support monkey, but today he'll be doing the damage. I put him in the same spot as the Sentry Champion, and had him start Ultra Boosting himself whenever possible. This way, he'll attack faster and place more sentries down. Even with this though, he was already struggling against the 40s, as a few rounds made it several laps around the track before getting popped. He continued on into the 50s and 60s, where he took on Moabs and BFBs, both of which made it pretty far, especially since it'd take him a lap or 2 to clean up the ceramics inside. Luckily, his cleansing foam removes properties like regrow, so he didn't lose to around 76 or 79. But even before super ceramics respawning, these BFBs were getting super far, and that's what did him in. Round 82 with its 10 BFBs and 5 fortified ones. He did manage to break everything down to just ceramics and pop most of them by the time they leaked, but he just barely ran out of time. I was honestly surprised he made it this far, as I didn't expect him to pop the ZOMG on round 80. But 82 is his score. Next, we have the XXXL trap. I put him in the middle of the straight line map so that Bloons could be trapped going either direction, and made him a 205. This will let him place traps more often and give him some more single target damage for the bads. For the first several rounds, everything was getting trapped. The only thing was I forgot to move my mouse over there to collect the trap right away, so some Bloons would get through while it waited to be collected. Once it was gone though, the NG placed a trap right away and caught back up. I saw this and moved my mouse over there for round 82, and his performance drastically improved, as he could now keep up with the Bloons by placing more traps. The rounds went by, and he was one-shotting everything, making us some extra money along the way. My personal favorite round to watch was 94, as it was perfectly timed to show off his skills, but round 95 was nice too. There's something special about him almost keeping up with the DDTs on that round that has ended so many of my chimps runs. But eventually, he ran into the bad on round 100 and wasn't even close to popping it. On to our final monkey, we have the Beast Handler, starting with the Megalodon. Now I know we've been doing each tier 5 on their own, but the Beast Handlers require others to be able to control their tier 5s. So we'll be maxing out the power of each one. It's still one beast, just 7 different handlers. We put the Meg in the middle of the long map and watched it rip the balloons apart. Anything that got in its range would be dragged into the water, and it'd pop all the balloons near it with its thrashing. This continued for a long time. I mean, it even held round 118 to the first lap, as it one-shot all the DDTs and ZOMGs, and round 119 did even worse. The moment a bad got in his range, he dragged them in, so the Meg didn't even have to deal with the children inside. I wasn't sure how long this one-shotting would last, but I figured it had to end soon. But it just kept happening. Even the fortified bad on 140 was pulled into the depths, though this was easily the slowest one so far. Fast forward 30 rounds, and we finally met a blimp that could resist the Meg's pull. The bad on round 170 was the first Bloon not to get one shot. I'm not sure how the damage works compared to dragging it in, but it took 13 separate bites from the Meg to pop him. And from here on out, all of the bads had to be popped this way instead of being one shot. Everything else was super easy though. They would either pass the bads and get insta-killed, or just get popped by the Meg's thrashing while he was latched onto a bad. He cruised through the rest of the hundreds, making his way to the fortified bads. And even without being able to one-shot them, he took them both out a little over halfway through the map. But eventually, the Bloons were too much, and for this tier 5 beast, it was round 215. All of the normal blimps were a piece of cake, but these 6 bads were pretty tough, especially with one of them being fortified. And this beefy one made it through in the end. Next, we have the Giganotosaurus. He started chomping through the rounds, even dealing with round 104 in just a few bites. I was unfamiliar with this guy's game, so I was blown away. Looking farther into it, the Giganotosaurus has a crazy 150 pierce, 1,550 damage, an additional 516 damage to stun balloons, and he bites every 0.9 seconds. Plus, he has a global stomp that deals 950 damage every 15.5 seconds. So it's no wonder why he's crushing these balloons. Round 139 literally did not complete a single lap, and he popped all of 140 before they made it halfway. This domination continued for quite some time and didn't really slow down until the 180s. Here, ZOMGs would actually live a few laps, and the Moabs inside were fast enough to sneak an extra lap in from time to time. Still though, he continued on. These stomps and bites seem to be extra effective versus DDTs, probably because they're so fast that stunning them is super useful, and they don't have the most health to be able to tank his chomps. But eventually, something got through, and it was the final bad on round 193. And for our final monkey, we have the Paukai. This feathered beast can pick up ZOMGs and below and do solid damage in the process. He easily made it to the hundreds, and even here he was stalling some of the rounds at the very start until they were popped down to nothing, like rounds 136 and 37, who didn't even complete a single lap, even though they took a little bit to pop. Round 140 came, and I thought he'd be a goner. But somehow, someway, this giant bird managed to pop the bads on this round. And honestly, it was pretty easy for him, only letting them get about a fourth of the way through the map. He continued on, beating tougher and tougher balloons, making his way to the 170s, where each round took a couple minutes to complete. The nice thing is that the only difficult balloons for him were DDTs and bads. The prior just because they were getting so fast, and the bads because they couldn't be flown back to the start. One funny thing is that we had to pick this map over the oval because DDTs were too fast for the Paukai to catch on the other map, causing him to lose in the 140s, but on this map they run back into him. This was amazing, but eventually he had to lose. And for the Paukai, it was round 178 that did him in. A bad managed to leak just before breaking down to ZOMGs and DDTs. It was fun to watch though, as he just attacked the bad the entire time, only damaging other balloons if they overlapped with it. And if anything passed the bad, the bird would fly it back to the start, buying way more time for itself. But that was how far each tier 5 monkey can get on its own perfect map. If you want to see how far each one can get in chimps, click this video right here.